You're taking a live look over what does appear to be Rafah there over in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin urging Iran's supreme leader against an attack on Israel that would target civilians and lead to any kind of escalation. The Jerusalem Post reporting a senior ally of the Kremlin leader delivered the message in meetings with top Iranian officials as the Islamic Republic weighs its options against Israel. All of this in response to the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who died last week in an explosion in Tehran while in Iran for the inauguration of the country's new president. As of now, Israel has not claimed responsibility for the killing of Haniyeh, though a Washington Post report just released does allege that Israel informed the U.S. after the assassination that it had killed the Hamas leader. A lot to discuss, no question here, so I do want to bring in an expert. Raphael Cohen is the director of the Strategy and Doctrine program of RAND Project Air Force. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to ask you a little bit about that report that does include Vladimir Putin speaking with Iran's supreme leader and essentially urging against anything that would lead to civilian deaths or any kind of escalation. What are your thoughts overall on that? Does it seem kind of out of character?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first off, it's important whenever you talk about the Russians in particular, what gets reported in the public press and what they may be saying behind the scenes may be two different things. So, I take all of these press reports with a little bit of a grain of salt. But let's say for the moment that it is true and it's accurate that Putin is urging some sort of restraint by the Iranian regime. There are a couple of motivations that may be at play here. First, if you look at the Israeli population at large, there is a large segment of the Israeli public that are Russian citizens. There was a large diaspora community from Russia in Israel, and Russia does care about them. I mean, in fact, Russia intervened to help get one of the hostages that Hamas took back on October 7th out at the urging of Vladimir Putin. So, Russia does care about those Russian civilians here too, which may be caught in the crossfire. But second, I think there's a strategic logic why Putin might want to keep the escalation under control. And that's because, if there is a large-scale conflict inside the Middle East, that's going to suck resources away from Ukraine. Russia is providing advanced air defenses to Iran. Iran, in turn, is providing Russia with Shahed drones. And Russia doesn't want to interrupt the flow of that. Russia, in some ways, would like the United States to be distracted by the Middle East, but not to the extent where it actually detracts from its war effort with Ukraine.
And I touched on this off the top, but I want to get your thoughts overall as well. We do have that Washington Post report that is stating that Israel did alert the U.S. after the assassination of Haniyeh that they had conducted that assassination. Now, we do know that Israel has not claimed responsibility for the attack that did kill Haniyeh right there. My question, though, for you is why might the Biden administration, the White House, get angry toward Israel for not alerting them beforehand? That is part of the report from the Washington Post saying that the U.S. was, quote unquote, outraged.
So I think there are two reasons at play here. First, there's a very operational reason. When you have a large-scale assassination or a high-profile assassination like the Haniyeh strike was, that has second-order consequences for the United States military presence in the Middle East. In fact, there was the targeting of Al-Assad Air Base just the other day, which wounded a number of American service members and U.S. contractors there too. And moreover, the United States is now needs to rush forces back into the region to help keep the deterrence in check or keep the Iranians in check. So without a heads up, that becomes more difficult. But I think the second motivation here is that the Biden administration really wants some sort of ceasefire, peace deal-ish coming out of the Israelis and Hamas. The major interlocutor for that was Ismail Haniyeh. The assassination of Haniyeh therefore makes that ceasefire deal less likely, at least in the near term. And so I think that's another motivation for why the Biden administration was displeased by the action.
And kind of on that same note here, as we discuss the ceasefire deal, the hostage release deal, we do know that Hamas, after the death of Haniya, has now named Yahya Sinwar as the new leader of Hamas. What does that say to you? And overall, what sort of effect could that have on the war itself and the ceasefire efforts?
So on the operational conduct of the war, not much. I mean, even before this, the person really calling the shots in Gaza with Hamas was Yahya Sinwar already. In fact, there was reporting that there was tension between Ismail Haniyeh and Sinwar about who, in fact, is in charge of Hamas's actions. And Haniyeh was increasingly displeased with Sinwar for going off on his own without sort of following political directives. So in some ways, appointing Sinwar as the head of Hamas is already just officially confirming the role that he's de facto been playing for the last several months already. Now, what this does do, though, is I think it sends a series of symbolic messages. For Hamas and its supporters, it shows a sort of an act of defiance. You see sort of laudatory messages, both from Hamas, other Hamas leaders, but also from fellow resistance members, Hezbollah, sort of praising the action. By contrast, I think the Israelis are going to interpret the appointment of Sinwar as more confirmation that Hamas cannot be dealt with. It needs to be destroyed. And Sinwar is not the kind of guy who you want to necessarily sit down and make peace with.
The U.S. does continue to essentially warn Iran against a retaliatory strike of any kind on Israel, saying that there will be essentially serious consequences as a result. Does Iran fear the U.S. at all? Does that mean anything when they do say, don't attack?
So I think it means something. The question is, how much does it mean? So it's not a question of either they do fear us or they don't. The question is a little bit in the shades of gray here. Now, we've noticed that, we've tried to warn the Iranians before for not attacking Israel and not attacking U.S. proxies. Sometimes they follow us, sometimes they don't. As the United States was reasonably successful, for instance, in tamping down attacks on American bases by Iranian proxies in Iraq, for instance, it obviously was not successful back in April when we also tried to warn the Iranians don't attack Israel in response to the strike on the Iranian consulate. So, it's a little bit of a shade of gray here, Josh, rather than sort of an either or clean dichotomy.
The IDF actually coming out with another report saying that Hamas has, again, we've reported on this a lot, fired dozens of projectiles from launchers that are essentially embedded within Gaza humanitarian zones, like what you're looking at right now on your screen in Rafah. Is that further evidence, let's say, of civilians being used as these human shields?
Yeah, so Hamas has always had its infrastructure deeply embedded in the population. I mean, the Israelis throughout the last 10 months or so have been uncovering tunnel networks, arms caches in schools, and the like. The Hamas doesn't have military bases quite the same like we do here in the United States, or that most other major states do, which are sort of apart from the population centers. It's all intermingled, and that makes the Israeli military challenge all the more challenging. The fact is, though, that one of the challenges in sort of separating and minimizing civilian casualties is that the military targets are right next to the civilian ones, and trying to separate the two is a technically very challenging task.
All right, Raphael Cohen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break it all down. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
No, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Josh.
All right, thank you. Love having you here. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care.